In this lecture, we're going to look at the different types of risk. We're first going to define what risk is, and then we're going to look at the 4 different types of risk: legal, operational, reputation, and investment. So first, what is risk? Risk is the potential for harm, and there's a formula that's out there in the cybersecurity world. You don't need to know this for the CIPP US, but that formula is risk equals threat times vulnerability. Essentially, if there's a vulnerability, let's say there are no locks on your doors, but there are no threats, there's no one that wants to go into your house, then there's no risk. Similarly, we could say let's say a mob of people want to storm into your house, but you live at the top of a castle and there's a giant moat around it with alligators, then perhaps you have a threat but no vulnerability. In that case, there would still be no risk. We manage risk by identifying the risk and then implementing controls. Control, in short, is a measure used to mitigate risk. And we're going to look at 2 examples. In our first example, we risk bodily harm via car accident when we get in the car. As much as we wouldn't like to think about it, the chances that we get into a car accident are not 0. There's a chance. And so in order to mitigate any harm that we might suffer due to a car accident, we're going to implement a number of different controls. For example, we're going to wear our seatbelt. At night, we're going to put on our headlights. We're going to obey traffic laws. We're going to maintain the car, tire pressure, windshield wipers, etc. We're going to eliminate distraction by not looking at our cell phone or not texting while we're driving. And we're going to avoid impairments. For example, we're not going to drink and drive. As a second example, we're going to look at something that applies directly to privacy. For example, a risk might be emotional harm, embarrassment, or discrimination, and we might suffer that harm, embarrassment, or discrimination if an embarrassing medical fact were to get out about ourselves. And so the threat there is a breach of PHI, or protected health information. A vulnerability could be untrained staff. Maybe we have a new employee, they have no idea, how to encrypt data, or that they can't read medical records aloud. I don't know, something silly like that. That would be a vulnerability. Also, perhaps over-collection, we've talked about, not collecting data that we don't need to collect. Improper access controls. So again, think about a filing cabinet that has a bunch of medical records in it, and there's no lock on that filing cabinet. Anyone can open it up and go through the medical records. Lack of transparency with regards to individuals. They don't know how their information is being protected or why it's being collected. Lack of encryption, no privacy by design. In order to mitigate these vulnerabilities, we might use privacy training and awareness for new employees, data minimization, access controls, cybersecurity and privacy audits, encryption, and privacy by design. There are 4 types of risk that we need to know about for the CIPP US: legal, operational, investment, and reputation. We're going to look at legal and operational first. A legal risk could be federal, state, local, or international. A contract with a customer, if there's a breach of that contract, would also be a legal risk. And finally, industry standards. If we're in the credit card or debit card industry, for example, and we're not appropriately safeguarding our data according to the PCI DSS standard, then we might be liable for some legal action. Here, when we're referring to operational, we're actually talking about the boots on the ground or the hands on the keyboard, the folks that are public-facing, customer-facing. And here we're concerned primarily with administrative efficiency, striking the right balance between customer and organization. And we can think about there being 2 extremes of operational risk. There's a maximization risk and a minimalist risk. At the maximization level, we have perhaps a company that's collecting any and all data they can on their customers. The benefit here would be personalization. A website or tool, a service, knows everything that it can gather about its users, and therefore is able to give them the right types of ads or other service. The threat here is over-collection. Again, that data might be viewed as toxic. It's a liability. It's going to require protection, and if there's a breach, then that could be a tremendous hit to the organization. We might also say in this context that the individuals, the consumers, don't have a right of access to the data, and in that case, there's a lack of transparency. And if you think back to the fair information practices we spoke about earlier, access, amendment, choice, consent, These are all very important measures that need to be in place. At the minimalist level, the perspective, the idea is generally that data is toxic. Again, this is a liability. The more data we have on individuals, the more liability we're carrying around, the more protections are going to be required for this data, and therefore the larger the burden on the organization. Not having any data might mean that your service or your website offers no personalization whatsoever. While some people may find that attractive, one problem, or the other side to the coin, may be that there's no logging or tracking for cybersecurity. For example, if you have no idea who's coming and going on your website, if a malicious actor comes in, does a bunch of damage, and then leaves, and you don't have any data on that individual, then there's not going to be any way for you to seek any type of compensation or launch a suit or have any type of enforcement actions over this malicious actor. The final two types of risk that we need to understand are reputation and investment. Reputation should be pretty self-explanatory. How would a breach or other adverse event affect the company? Does the company value privacy? And then how does the company demonstrate this? With regards to investment, we want to think about return on investment, or ROI. How much does a tool or service cost? For example, if you invest $1 million into a governance risk and compliance tool, are you going to see a return on that investment, either by fewer enforcement actions or regulatory inquiries, or perhaps just amongst the user base, amongst the market of people that are looking for a comparable service? They identify you as being a privacy champion, and that earns you more users, more customers. In this lecture, we answered the question, what is risk? In short, risk is the potential for harm. And we looked at 4 types of risk, including legal, organizational, reputation, and investment.